more details are emerging in relation to how the system of travel for non-essential travel using the COVID EU digital cert will operate from July the 19th. With me on the line to talk about this in more detail is the editor of Air and Travel magazine, Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, good morning to you and thanks for talking to us in the programme. What can you tell us about what we're learning now,
Jerry,
about where we are here?
Yeah, well, this much we know. The system came in last Friday in every country except Ireland. It's working really well. It's working in places we mightn't have expected to work well. East of the Elbe is performing really well and even better in some ways than west of the Elbe. European aviation is back to 65%. Figures just arrived in the last 20 minutes. 65% of the levels it was in 2019. People are arriving in Ireland since Friday because even though we haven't introduced it, we're obliged to accept people from other countries who have the digital COVID certificate. Issuing of the certificate outbound does seem to be in hand. The officials are saying everything is working, and the politicians, as politicians do according to their hue, are sometimes saying that it might be difficult. We had people saying in the Sunday papers it might be August or even September. The officials are saying we're ready, we're going to be ready to roll on July the 19th.
Okay.
As of Monday, everyone who has gone to one of the major HSE vaccination portals will get an email with a link. You won't get that vital QR code to get you through everything, but you will get a link to download it. People who have been vaccinated by the GPs, the process of feeding the information back is slower and a little bit more complex. They'll be getting letters, and they will be able to get to that will give them the link to get their download, to download that QR code. It's very clear that everyone who's been through the full course of vaccination, Jerry, is going to be able to travel without restriction after July the 19th. The date is important, by the way, because all but essential travel is still banned in Ireland until July the 19th. But after July the 19th, they will be able to travel unrestricted.
Yeah.
There is going to be a gap in the middle, though. Children under 6 are allowed to travel into Ireland without a PCR test or a vaccination, and children under 12 in a lot of countries, Spain and Portugal, 70% of us go on holidays there. Both of those have a law that children under 12 can travel without a test or a vaccination. The question is, Jerry, that bit in the middle, the people over the age of 12 and under the vaccination age, they're still going to need tests.
And that would make it a lot more expensive. People do want to travel for whatever reason with their family if they have children of that age.
It can get messy and it can get complicated, and it's even more complicated when you consider, for instance, I mentioned Spain and Portugal. 70% of our outbound holidays, they're the places that matter. Up till about a month ago, they required a PCR test, and children under the age of 6 were exempt. They both changed to antigen test, and children under the age of 12 are now exempt. So it's a moving picture. The antigen test, it's not just a question of cost, it's about half the cost. It's also convenience. A PCR test you need to do in advance, up to a day in advance, generally a day in advance, and you get your result overnight. An antigen test, you get the text while you're waiting, you're within 20 minutes. So the antigen test has been accepted outbound. This is Irish people travelling out. It's been accepted in every country.
Yeah.
Coming back to Ireland is going to be the question. Will we still require a PCR test? And as you say, family of 4, it's not going to be, it's a €90 or €95 in Ireland outbound, depending on which operator you use. It's not as expensive abroad, but still it's a very big added expense for those who are not vaccinated. Remember, everyone vaccinated will be able to travel unrestricted. Did
I hear you right at the start when you were saying the people who come in from European countries to Ireland right now who have the QR code to show that they've been vaccinated, they qualified for the digital cert, that they can come into Ireland and go about their business freely? Is that right?
It would make your jaw drop to see what happened in the airport last Friday, because it never dawned on anyone in immigration that this was going to happen. And we had several hours, almost a Mexican standoff with people who'd arrived with their digital COVID certificate, perfectly legal, being threatened with mandatory hotel quarantine. Now, what we've seen the regulation about about self-isolation still applies. People arriving in from abroad you see, member states are still. They're still entitled to impose restrictions.
Yeah.
It's very important.
We have a situation in France at the
operates.
moment. If you went on a short trip to France, it wouldn't be worth it because you'd have to go and isolate for a number of days, and the same in Ireland. And as Delta becomes an increasing problem, that may change again. So people have to watch very carefully where they're travelling to and how long they're intending to travel there for.
That's right. It's still going to be complicated until July the 19th. After that, we'll have much more clarity. And there is a suggestion that the fully vaccinated will not have to do the self-isolation that's required for 14 days. You do get a text after 5 days saying do a PCR test, and if you're clear, you can end the self-isolation. But the law as it stands, Jerry, is really important. Public health policy in Ireland as it stands is that non-essential travel is banned still until July the 19th, and everyone arriving has to do a self-isolation for 14 days. Now, we don't know what's changing on July the 19th, and the way this is where we haven't anything in writing. What we have is politicians saying things to journalists, and some terrific journalism being done by this, with people using their sources very, very well. But it has led to conflicting pictures of what will happen, and to put them all together, to take them all and look at them and try and extract what's going on. It does look like we're going to end the mandatory self-isolation for fully vaccinated people after July the 19th. It's not clear if self-isolation on return will still remain for those who have travelled who are not vaccinated and who've taken tests in both directions. And that, as you know, is a big problem. If you have taken your holidays, you can't take 2 more weeks or even 5 days more just to isolate after you return.
Yeah, and the wider question then, on a listener has a relation living in the US wishing to visit Ireland in September. She's been told she'll have to quarantine for 2 weeks on arrival in Ireland. Callers having difficulty believing this could be true. Is it? Are Irish people not allowed to travel to the US and vice versa?
Irish people are not allowed at the moment, and that looks like being lifted. It's at European level. There's a very strong move to allow vaccinated Americans to arrive in Ireland. They are doing that, by the way, at the moment, but they have to self-isolate, and also to lift the restrictions on Europeans going to America. My advice to your listener is play for time. We're very, very early in the game here. July 19th will probably see a set of new regulations or changes coming in, and what she's been told is exactly correct. People coming from America have to self-isolate for 14 days after they arrive. Now, and they have to do a test before they come. But by September, I would be really surprised if that has not changed. There is another issue which nobody has actually mentioned. I mentioned it in the 6-1 News last night, but that America doesn't recognise the AstraZeneca vaccination. And as you know, Jerry, 23% of the vaccinations in Ireland have been AstraZeneca. So until they recognise it, even if vaccinated Irish are let into America, we could have a problem with that.
And speaking of problems, another listener gets in touch. As a UK resident, can you say if visitors to Ireland will still need a negative PCR test after July 19th, even if we have the NHS app QR code showing full vaccination? Plus, is this acceptable in place of the Euro COVID passport? And that's another question. England no longer part of the European Union, so there'll be another difficulty there, will there?
Right. This is important because it applies to Northern Ireland residents as well. The NHS COVID pass is recognised by individual European countries. There isn't an agreement with Europe as a whole, but there are bilateral agreements with places like Spain, Greece, Portugal. As again, this is the complete silence we have as to what's happening on July the 19th. No indication if the NHS COVID pass will be recognised by Ireland, but I'd be surprised if it isn't.
Yeah, with the common travel area and the links between the countries, you'd imagine it would have to be, but we still don't have clarity on that at the moment.
No clarity, Jerry. That's the story of since last March of 2020.
Yeah, it certainly is. And another question I should probably be asking the department rather than you, Owen, but and we'll find out, I guess. But
I mean, I'm interpreting what the department is
saying.
Sure.
Sure. No, but I'm just saying, people are wondering, like, will these letters, if you went to a GP, will you have your letter before the 19th? If you're booked to travel, will they arrive on time? Everyone will get the email from next Monday, but will a letter be in your inbox or your letterbox, effectively?
Yeah, the officials are saying that they're fairly well set up for delivering the email ones. Now, the postal ones are a little bit more complicated because, as you know, GPs are very, very overwhelmed at the moment, and getting data back to Central Portal is an extra chore for them. So the information flow might be a problem. The delivery of the letter might be a problem. There is a helpline being set up. I wouldn't have great faith in it not being overwhelmed by queries,
yes,
especially in the first few days. But what will another very important thing is they are suggesting you won't get that code till 14 days after your vaccination. So anyone who's been vaccinated, the vaccination rate in the last week has been a sight to behold. It's quite impressive what their rollout. But it means that all those people getting their second vaccine this week will have to wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, they certainly will. Okay, well, look, there's lots of questions coming in as well from all different countries, and lots of people saying loads of different questions. A listener says, double vaccination and PCR test coming from the UK into Ireland. Have a PCR test booked in Ireland. Do they still have to self-isolate? Yes, would be the answer to that, I'd imagine.
Yeah, okay. Coming from the UK, there's really important. When you go to the UK, you don't need any test. When you come back, you do. You need a PCR test in advance, 72 hours, up to 72 hours in advance. You can get them in some of the pharmacies. Boots do them, and there's an awful lot of private operators do it. But make sure it's PCR, and also make sure it's not the NHS one. We had 30 people carted off to mandatory quarantine from one flight because they thought the NHS test would be recognised in Ireland. It's not. Now, that's different from the NHS COVID pass, which is being introduced. But I'm even complicating things there. But back to your question. 5 days after you've come from the UK, you can do a PCR. You'll get a notification to do a PCR test. You can do it. And if you're clear, you have to wait for a second PCR test after 10 days. That's a new measure introduced because of the variant, and it means that if you're coming from any other country, you're clear after 5 days with a PCR test. With England, it takes 5, and another one after 10. Those regulations are still in place. Now, because of the rhetoric and the narrative we're getting every night from the press conference and the emphasis on the Delta variant, it could be a case that after July the 19th, while we open travel to the rest of Europe, that even vaccinated might still end up with self-isolation requirements. But I've no guidance on that, no visibility on that. And there is the way politicians are talking, Micheál Martin even yesterday, saying that they will be subject to public health guidelines, which means that decisions could be taken at very short notice indeed. Okay, all right, indeed. And a listener asked about Turkey coming back from Turkey, yes, into Ireland on Sunday. Yeah, Turkey is not part of the arrangement. They're lobbying extremely hard to have a bilateral agreement with the EU where vaccinated Europeans can travel to Turkey. They're not looking for reciprocation. That's what usually delays these things. But they're saying they're happy to allow vaccinated Europeans in, and they want them to be able to return without restrictions. Now, that isn't in place at European level, but the lobbying is going on, and they're hoping to get that. And it's very important for, at peak, we had 114,000 Irish people going to Turkey on holidays. We have a new flight, a new route to Antalya from Turkish Airlines due to start in August. So Turkey outside of the club at the moment, but lobbying very hard to get in. Very hard at the door to get in. Okay, and a final question for you, Owen. A listener asking, what about travel from Australia and back? Australia doing things very strict on the travel front and have done since the start of the pandemic. Alan Joyce, he's from Tala, he's from Dublin, and he's the CEO of Qantas. The most recent conversation with him, he's very gloomy about Australia reopening. He had planned to resume international flights in October. That's probably going to have to push back. The Australians reduced the cap on the number of people travelling to and from Australia even further in recent weeks, and that shows the way they're thinking. It's causing havoc because people who have booked flights, and they're very expensive, to Australia at the moment are finding them cancelled. So Australia is a no-no, and it could be maybe this time next year before we see it opening with any degree of normality. And that's largely because when it does open, the pent-up demand of Australians trying to get home and Irish people trying to get back is so great. It's enough
huge
to fill several flights.
Yeah, it certainly is. Eoghan, listen, thanks a million for answering all those questions for us this morning.
Jerry.
Great stuff. Eoghan Corry there on the line, talking to us about, editor of Air and Travel magazine, talking to us about what we know so far and thus far in relation to the COVID-19 EU travel cert.